Okay, we might make a start. I'm conscious of time, but the good thing is that this webinar will be recorded for that anyone who's missed the first part of it as well, and I'll mention that towards the end. So what we want to do is I'd just like to welcome you to our data privacy webinar 3-part series. Don't worry about my voice. It's been playing up all weekend, so I'm still able to speak, which is a very good thing. And just a brief overview on what we're looking at. And so what I wanted to cover is that data privacy, a journey to sustainability. And so what we're going to look at today is really about the data discovery and about the journey of where data has come from in terms of the data, the insights, as well as the governance aspects. And then next, in the 2 weeks, we'll look at the challenges around data cleanup. And I have the privilege to interview David Messman, a veteran with about 15 years experience in coming from a legal background, who's been working in the privacy space for a number of years. And then we'll finish the series on the 5th of April with Rob Tyler from the Australian practice, and he'll be talking about some sustainable practices around, the data privacy frameworks, roles and responsibilities, and how do we develop a more governance model around that to make sure that data privacy is sustainable. Before we get into it, there's a lot of context around data. And so what I wanted to do is to go for a few slides around the challenges of where we face them today. And so one of the things is that when we take a step back and before we look at data privacy or governance, we just need to understand that data is evolving at a rapid rate. And this is quite new to me as well, that back in 2010, we only had 2 zettabytes of data. And by 2023, we've got about 120 zettabytes. So it's growing at a phenomenal rate across the world. And some interesting facts to take into consideration is that, only that approximately 90% of all the data that it is being replicated off something, and that most of it's 10% that is original. So what that means is that your email account's probably scattered across everything from Facebook to Google, and it's just being replicated multiple times, but it's still the same source. One of the areas is that big data is a growing industry. And so when we start looking at privacy, we need to take that into consideration that, data is evolving and there is money in that as well. And organizations are starting to get on hold of that. You look at enterprises, 40% of enterprises worldwide are starting to move towards the cloud. And so big data becomes such a key aspect. And then on the flip side, that organizations need to start managing data breaches, which is increasing exponentially. Average is about 4.3 million per data breach. So then when we look at data, we need to take into consideration that it has increased by 6,000% and is still increasing exponentially when we start looking at data privacy. One of the things, I'll take a step back, because when we start looking at data, we've got to understand some of the history. And most of the data, we look at it from an insight perspective. And I just wanted to showcase just a brief analogy. And back in the 1990s and 2000, most data was based upon demographics and insights and historical. And just to give you an idea on how organizations used it previously, and then we'll take it to today's modern day. So if we take, for example, the Super Bowl, and if you're from Australia or from Asia, this is quite big in America. And one of the things that they realized from data is that there is money in it, and not just in actual people attending, but people at home. And the key ones was everyone knows that, that in order to watch a Super Bowl, you need to drink beer and you need to have snacks as part of that process. And so they started analyzing the data, and you worked out that there's about 192 million adults watch the actual Super Bowl, which is pretty much half of America. And they started analyzing and say $85 per average was spent on the supermarket in terms of, and on food and drinks. And that related to 69% of beer, snacks, and deli and pizza. Pizza they usually buy from Domino's and Pizza Hut and other things. And so organizations started to realize that there is value in this. And how can they maximize it? And this was back in the 2000s when they started to look at this. And this is one of the analogies I heard. And so when you look at a supermarket, they realize that data insight is basically, that the actuals, they recommend that most of the time a guy or, parents will come in and buy beer, which is a given. Then they'll go to the snacks department, they'll go to the deli, and then nappies. And this is one of the analogies I heard back in my days when I was studying back in 2000, that even from a correlation, that the organizations realized that the correlation between alcohol and nappies. And they realized that there's a certain demographics on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday after work, the partner might call up the spouse and say, can you go, why are you buying all the snacks and alcohol? Can you buy nappies? And so what they realize that there is value in data. And so, when you look at the actual path that they follow, and they realize that there's real estate premium in supermarkets, and that if they can maximize the shelving, they can charge more to the actual wholesalers to put a position on that particular path that might increase the sale. And so they can get value out of selling more to the existing, but also, getting increases to paying for that premium space. And so we fast forward to modern day. And if we start looking at data insights versus data governance, this is quite important. When we start looking at classification, we see that, back in the 1980s, most organizations were historical, and they were very much based on report. Within that time frame, there's been more of a business driven back in the 1990s. And so they started to move towards, the marketing or the sales team using particular data, and they started mining it. And that was back, like the demographics on sports or even on education, on different industries, but it was still siloed in their approach. But then you look at modern day, you fast forward to 2010, which is about 10 years ago. It started moving towards predictive driven AI machine generated big data. And this is quite scary, because this means that they're able to predict. And an example of that is, you look at a particular, they're able to take historical data, plugging it in a machine, AI, whether it's a SAP panel or different types of analytic tools out there today, your Salesforces and other things. And what they can predict is that if we increase sales in a particular region by 5%, we're going to get this much profit. If we increase by 10%, it's still not going to yield as much profit. And so it helps the AI is driving or reporting to drive value for that organization, so they can get the right blend, increasing it exactly the right proportion to drive value. Then we look at prescriptive driven, and this is the next steps in AI driven. And so basically you have an end goal in mind. And what that does, it works out what's the best, and the AI and machine learning drives how it would actually get to that particular point. But when we look at the flip side of the actual data evolution, and we just look at it from a data governance point of view, and back in the 1980s, we'll see that it was chaotic. There was no reporting, and if anyone's back in that era, you would know that there has been a bit of an evolution since then. Becomes more reactive. There were some baselines on data quality management, MD plans, strategies started to form, but it's still reactive. We have an issue, let's just react to it according to the board. Then it became more defined. KPIs started to drive data dictionaries, stewardship. There was a bit more ownership. Master data became executed via some support technologies, a root cause, started to mature over time. Then we take it to the next level, and we started looking at the proactive. And so organizations started to take more of a proactive account to that particular thing. And so data quality management became more automated, where silos were broken down, and then they saw value. And that's why you see your Facebooks, your Googles, started leveraging that data and started mining it. And so then from a governance point of view, the organization started to put governance around and says, okay, now we've got customer data, we need to manage it accordingly. We know that we've got in this particular silo this, and started pulling all that together. And that's where the cloud movement happened. Then you look at predictive feedback. And so when you start looking at where we are today, and it's still lagging behind the prescriptive driven data analytics. But what you see is that data governance has matured. And most of the time, and I'm not sure many organizations online would have actually have this type of thing. So this is where your data quality management process is fully automated from top to bottom. The top-down strategy, what it means is that your people, your processes around the way that you manage privacy, you manage governance, you manage how people use and consent, everything is all aligned. And also the technology that drives even from the analytics is aligned completely. And so there's complete alignment. What we say in predictive is to have the people, process, and technology in pure harmony. Means that there's an alignment across the organization between your data insights and your data governance to achieve value for the organization. So then we look at from a data privacy point of view. And we're just going to take the objective of the PDPA in Singapore. And this is something, you've got your GDPRs, and that's quite recent. And if you look at even from a data consent and privacy, is quite a new terminology that's come about. It's been around for many years, but it's only come in recent lights as with your GDPRs. And then you've got your California CCPAs, then your Australian governance, and you've got your PDPAs. And it's starting to spread across Asia and Australia. And what we see is that when we start looking in context of data governance, it's different. And so it looks at how you collect, use, or disclose personal data for legitimate and reasonable purposes. But it doesn't tell you that you should use technology or people or alignment or process that needs to align. All you're told from a policy and a legal point of view is that you need to manage privacy data. And this is a challenge for most organizations, because what does privacy mean? And even if you look at it from a general thing, and you ask most organizations that I've been to, and I always ask them, what is your privacy data? Do you follow the AGAPA? Do you follow the PDPA? Everyone's got a different opinion on what's sensitive and what important data. And let alone on one side, technology and data and analytics is evolving at such a rapid rate, but on the flip side, it's still way behind. And so when we look at the challenges that most organizations face, and this is a common challenge, and you're not the only one, that people are online. And so basically the classification of data, how do we classify it? What's a sensitivity rating? How do we do that across an organization where data is exploding? As I said before, data is exploding at such an exponential rate. There's open security vulnerabilities, technologies having holes in it. And then we look at evolving regulations. One thing you might have, PDPA, but then you've got another requirement. You might have telecommunication regulation, and then the government steps in and says, this is not strong enough, and then they start evolving and changing. And so it becomes a nightmare for anyone who's a data privacy officer or someone in the compliance aspects to keep up to date. The cost of maintaining data privacy, is legal supposed to be involved, or is it a issue of a technologist? Now, who should be driving these particular things in the organization? Then you look at advancements in the landscape, and as we showed before, that technology is evolving at such a rapid rate that how do we keep on top of those particular things? Human error, all it takes is someone to do a misconfiguration, and then it's called a data breach, and then you've got to publish it to the world that your organization or sends an email containing privacy data that they didn't know that it was privacy data through because lack of education or knowledge or data loss protection or technology that wasn't aligned with the organization's understanding and policies. And so we see privacy challenges should be an alignment of people, process, technology. But in most organizations, we always see that the people and process might be aligned, that we might have the best process and tech in terms of policies and how we manage consent. But what's missing in most organizations is any technology that can potentially drive real value on how we can actually navigate these particular things. And that's why I said before that data is quite an important aspect. So when we look at data privacy opportunity, we shouldn't see it as a challenge, because the problem is that data is always going to be there. And no matter what we do, most organizations are heading towards digitization, transformation in the cloud, leveraging AI technology. Even in the US, 48% will be adopting it. And so if data privacy and governance, if we're not leveraging technology to drive value for the organization, we've got to be left behind, because machine learning, predictive, and prescriptive is going to take over. And if you look at even an example from a banking sector, and one of the things is that from an example is the core banking modernization, 1 billion. This happened back in 2000, and I was involved in this particular project. And one of the key take points from it is that the bank saw value in having a customer-centric processing. And so what that means is prior to that, everything was defragmented. And so they had a privacy data in credit cards. They had a separate system managed credit cards, investments, insurances, retail, business banking. And so they could not see a complete view on that particular customer. And so by modernizing and breaking down all the silos and building a complete view on a customer, CBA was able to generate a better view and able to sell products and services, and to identify high value customers that they couldn't see previously from previous historical data, to be able to develop a more centric view on that particular thing. And so they're able to generate real-time benefits from that. And so if you look at it from a value, that they're able to get a return after about 3 years on this thing. And so, take note that even if we look at data privacy, we should not see it as a hindrance. And this is the challenge, is that if we're using standard manual processes to manage privacy, we're going to face some enormous challenges because of the data's growth and acceleration. And so that's why it's important to start thinking about, we need technology to drive this. And so when we look at technology, it's only been in the last, say, 10 years that this area, especially around data privacy and governance, has really accelerated. And one of the things is, and the problem that most organizations that I've talked to is that, where do you start? And do I start with a data loss protection? Do I implement the consent management? Do I do a PI? Do I buy a solution for a PIA, for a privacy impact assessment, or a ROPA, or a privacy? And the problem is that there's no clarity for most organizations as they navigate this particular space. And one of the things that we find is that you need a roadmap in terms of technology. And the reason why I say that is that if you don't have a roadmap, then you're going to struggle to keep up to date with the advancements in data. And so when we look at it from a basic point of view, where do you start from any particular organization? The key to anything that you need to know is that you really need to discover your data. What is it that you've got? Where is it located? What servers, whether it's in SAP or HANA or in big data, or in a big data lake for Google, or is it Snowflake or Salesforce? And the key to any program is really discovering that. Then you need to protect your data. So once you know what your data is, it's easier to protect it, because then you can put that framework, the consent management. You know that your customers, you've identified your sensitivity, you minimized it, then you minimize it. So then you say who shouldn't get access, and you start removing it. And then you look at a governance on top of that. And one of the things that we realize is that you need technology. And one of the ones at Turnkey is that we do partner with a technology called BigID that helps organizations address this particular thing. And if we look at it from an intelligence platform, why should we do it manually? And I think this is where organizations struggle with. And so, technology has advanced where you can, connect up to multitude of sources, on-prem, off-prem. You can leverage the machine learning, and a BigID is one of the particular technologies that I like, because it does integrate machine learning. It does involve, create over time. It gives you that deep insights. It helps you to categorize your particular data, and then you can put that layer of governance on top of that in terms of data loss protection, encryption, and other things. And like I said, data discovery is sort of the key to it. And then if you look at it from a data point of view, like any tool that you really need to consider, it needs to have the ability to classify data. It needs to be able to, does it correlate data across the environment? Because data by itself is not really valuable, but when you can actually correlate it, identify duplicates where it's environment, especially if you're dealing with GDPR or PDPA, and you've got to manage where its source is and where it's been transferred to. Has it been moved to another country? Has it been used for a purpose outside of it? And so a lot of these tools do help you to navigate these particular things. Correlations in terms of, you have a particular use case where, I've got somebody called a Bruce Wayne. How do we know where their data's stored, from a DSAR perspective? And so a lot of these tools can help you to navigate this. And then from a catalog perspective, be able to achieve that. And so what I wanted to do with the time is I'll just go through that, because I know it's pretty short. Like with any tool, the most of them are AI driven. And the reason why I love the BigID tool is to be able to give most of that types that ticks those boxes in terms of automation and AI and discovery. And even if we look at it from a source point of view, one of the good things about BigID is that you're able to generate across the board. So you can actually import from any system, on-prem, off-prem. You can have your Office 365, your SailPoints. And what it does is you can actually pull and scan that data and pull it in a very simple way. And just an example of that, because it's just a limited time. And so you've got say, for example, we scanned the entire network, we see some unstructured file. And what we wanted to do is realize that, hey, we've got some file called a credit card number. And what the solutions can do today is it can tag it and say, hey, this particular file contains PI data. We can preview that. And it just gives you an idea what the scan looks like in terms of that. And so basically it's taken all the data, it doesn't store it unless we actually need to cache it. it picks it up and says, yep, in this particular file, based upon certain criteria, it does collect that particular data. Just due to limitations, I'll just give you a very quick overview on that. But technology is available today. Also, technology enables you to capture that policies. Instead of doing it in Excel or a Word document, you can store all your different policies, your PDPAs, your requirements, and your classifications. And so what it's saying is that, if I look at the Australian Data Privacy Act policy, I can look at passports, Medicare files, sexual identity, emission state. And so you can define criteria. And a lot of these tools now, they can actually define that. You can have GDPR as a part of those classifiers. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll finish up in a few minutes. And other things that you can do, and this is why I said technology really needs to be at that forefront of what you do from a discovery point of view. And even if you were to look at it from a discovery perspective, the good thing about technology now, it's so advanced that you can actually select from a handful of different requirements. And say, for example, if we were just to look at a Singapore requirement, say for a driver's license, and how do we, if we didn't have technology, we'd have to look for these particular things in actual Word documents and Excel, and it's a troublesome. And when technology is available, and say, for example, if you're looking at a driver's license and the tools are available today, such as BigID, they're able to scan for those particular 9-character lengths of a particular driver's license. And this is very similar. And what it does is it particularly scans for that type of thing. And what it also does, technology can give you where the inventory is. And so if we're just looking at it from a point of view, from a world map, what you can see is that data, transforms and how it moves from an inventory point of view, from a particular locations, where it resides, and also what types of files, the emails that you can have as a part of that process. And then, I'll just finish up with the actual database of this. I won't go too much in detail around this because when you start looking at these BigID tools, they're very simple, but it does create a lot of insights. And so I want to finish up because I'm conscious of about 5 minutes left, and just to answer any questions around this particular thing. And one thing is, if you want to find out more about this particular product or have a discussion around data privacy, we can organize because we partner with BigID, and we can give you more of a demo and a demonstration on these particular solutions that can really help you to navigate privacy data. With that in mind, I might just finish up and just ask any questions that anyone might have. You'll have a Q&A in your webinar session, and so just please feel to answer that. And while we're waiting for any questions, like I said, in 2 weeks, I'll be interviewing David Messmer, and he is a privacy expert with about 15 years, and he'll be able to go through and answer some of the questions. Working in that as coming from a legal background, he'll be able to answer some of these questions, and I'll be doing a Q&A with him, which would be quite interesting in the next part of the series. Any questions so far? The questions so far. And data discovery, lineages, technology. Okay. Can you select the data source for scanning if I don't want to do? Yes, you can. And so basically you can, the good thing about the BigID tool, it does provide you different types of scans and connectors as well. So the good thing is it's designed with the modern scans in mind. And so you can have your different ones. And so what you can do is you can do hyper scans, you can do full scans, because not everything, once you do a full scan, you might say, is it relevant? The good thing about it is that you can do it particularly on a certain type of data source. It depends on your requirement, because some data you might think it's not as frequent update, and there's no point doing a full scan on that particular thing. And some of the data sources that you have as well, just to give you a bit of an idea. Any other questions? And you'll see the good thing about the BigID tool, it does cover most of your cloud-based on-prem, off-prem solutions, and it can be on-prem, but it is SaaS-based, which keeps the cost quite low, but it uses that machine learning to really generate real value for an organization. I've got conscious we've got about 3 minutes left. Any other questions? Yes, it does, Nancy. So that it does cover structured and unstructured data, and that pretty much covers everything from that aspect. As a part of that process, from applications, SQL databases. So it really depends on, it covers pretty much most of those scenarios that you're looking at. And Brenton, you want to add anything to that one? Yeah,
Just been typing in a few responses there, folks, if you want to have a read through to get a little bit more detail.
Yep. So semi-structured and even data in motion. Any other questions before we finish up? I'm conscious of time. It's a lot to cover within 30 minutes, but we'll finish up if there's no further questions. We'll just wait a few more minutes. Just keeping an eye on any questions. Nope, I think that's pretty much it. Okay, what we might do is, conscious of time, we'll try to keep it short, sharp, and on the time. And so I just want to thank you for that. And like I said, if you have any questions or anything, or if you want to have a further discussion, and this session is recorded, so everyone will get a copy of that if you need to relay that to anyone. And just please feel to reach out to myself. I'm based in Singapore. I'm Richard Malmberg, and Rob Tyler is also based in Melbourne. And so we cover pretty much most of the region across, and we also have offices in also UK and Europe as well, Germany and France, Malaysia as well, and the US. And so I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. Unless there's no further questions, we might finish up at this point. All right. Thank you very much for your time then.